The Hellish Todoroki Family #2. Whoever smelt it, dealt it. Sorry, I've had a very stressful morning this morning, so I just need something light to just kind of take my mind off things. But by this point, you all know the rules of engagement. I'm going to review the latest episode of My Hero Academia. Before I do, I want to know what you thought about it, dear listener, down in the comment section down below. Leave a comment and you will be read out in next week's show. Once you dare, do all the YouTuber stuff that YouTube wants you to, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today. It will do them a power of good. Look, with this week's episode, all I can think about is that little bitchy commenter, that little video that I saw about a year or so ago of someone getting really pissy about all the Todoroki family stuff that happened last season. So, yeah, I'm sure that they really enjoyed this week's episode, but here and now, I just have to say that this episode was utterly brilliant. I know I'm going to sound like a psychopath when I say this, but I really enjoyed this week's episode. And I say that because I know that a lot of people conflate enjoyment with finding something humorous. Like, if you say something was fun, that means to imply that you were sat there chuckling and giggling all the way through it, and that wasn't the case for me for obvious reasons, because this was just a very dramatic, very heavy episode throughout, and often frequently, particularly towards we get into the end of this. Now, I feel that the best way to look at this episode is to effectively split up into thirds. I'm going to start off with the backstory stuff with Hawks. I feel that it was very insightful to look at him and just see how he came to be in the position that he was in, showing us a slice of life that we don't often see in fiction, let alone fiction of this kind. He grew up in abject poverty with an abusive father in a life of crime. It's something that we have had teased to us a few episodes ago, though granted that when Dabby said that, oh, his father is such and such and he's a villain, I was imagining some kind of mob boss, some kind of Yakuza guy, but at the end of the day, he's just some petty criminal. So when he was saying, it's his father is da-da-da-da-da, I'm imagining everyone at home going, oh no, his father is da-da-da-da-da, when this guy's just such a small fry. It'd be like saying, his father is Bob Wood. And like all three people that know him on the estate and know that he's kind of a scumbag that's been selling pirate VHS tapes for the past 40 years are going to go, oh no, not Bob Wood, but you know, whatever, I'm getting distracted. I feel that it was just heartbreaking to see just the kind of environment he grew up in, both physically, just the filth and the disgusting surroundings that he grew up in. It was an environment so brilliantly drawn and realised that you could almost smell it by looking at it. And just the fact that he grew up in such a terribly broken home, it is a heavy thing to see, because it shows just where he truly has come from as an individual. And you know, there's also that factor to it that you can't escape from, where you know that there's a lot of kids who sadly end up having to grow up like this. Hawks' story embodies the traditional escapist fantasies that superhero fiction has always been to many children. I mean, you think back to about 100 years ago when superhero fiction was just starting to break through, just how many children would have grown up reading the Superman comics or reading the Batman comics, and then imagining them being Robin, imagining themselves being adopted by the multi-millionaire who's going to look after them and their families and going on great adventures, defeating the bad guys. And Hawks is effectively having that life. Granted, it's maybe not gone quite in the direction that he may have dreamed it would have been growing up, but it's hard to really talk about, because there's so much within this episode that I think is just so good that you can't give it a deeper discussion to it, because it just speaks for itself. I feel that there is still more to come on his backstory, more stuff that we're going to see, because there is a line that makes me feel that there might be, but I didn't really see it properly because I had a bit of a coughing fit. I had some technical difficulties with my computer a little while ago. I accidentally knocked some dust into the air and I've just been coughing on and off, so I'll try and do this episode as quickly as I can without having some kind of seizure or some kind of attack. The second third is a far smaller slice of everything, so to call it a third I think is something of a misnomer, but it's us seeing more of the aftermath of just everything that's happened over the past few days or so in universe. Just getting a better sense of just how things have been breaking down and falling apart. It's just seeing just everything decaying before our eyes. We have the literal decay whenever Tomoru uses his powers. Now we're seeing it in more of an emotional state, and it is great to see. Again, not wanting to sound like a psychopath. I will admit that I feel this is stuff that I honestly would have rather seen a couple episodes prior to this, and then built up to the villain's escape stuff, but you can't really do that without knackering up the flow of the narrative of this particular story, so I understand that. It's just a matter of taste. My taste doesn't necessarily mean to be the right taste. It doesn't mean to say that I am right. It's just taste. You know, we all have our different opinions on that kind of stuff, but to see it here and now, I think that it is great. We truly are just seeing everything fall apart. Heroes are retiring left and right for reasons which you could understand, but in other reasons it kind of makes you wonder exactly why they became superheroes, because an occasion like this was always going to end up happening. We're just seeing just everything falling apart. The public is getting increasingly skeptical about whether or not the heroes can do their jobs. Some are taking up arms to defend themselves, and I'm imagine that maybe that stuff that they're using is stuff that was been designed by Reed Deschro's company. I suppose in some regards you could argue that all that kind of stuff is furthering the cause of the Meta Liberation Army in the background, which itself furthers my statement from a few episodes ago where I was saying that you can't really defeat the Meta Liberation Army in that regard. That ideology is always going to be there, and as people are starting to take up these weapons, people are going to start asking those questions. Granted, we're probably not going to see anything more of that, at least with the Meta Liberation Army angle, for the entirety of this series, but hey, that is an element that's going to be in the background. And of course, speaking of stuff in the background, we see Stain lurking in the dark like a monster waiting to pounce on people. I made a very career-ending joke then, but we'll move on. So his presence just means that we're either going to get a short reprise of his arc from earlier in the series, or he's going to become some kind of anti-hero taking on the villains, or he's going to start killing civilians using the support weapons. I don't know, but I'm just getting this urge to beat him up again in One's Justice, because that was fun. I got a real big kick out of that, but hey, that's a whole other matter. And of course, the final third, the final stuff, the stuff that everyone wants to talk about, the stuff that everyone wants to really dial into is the stuff with the Todoroki family, or must be more specifically with Endeavour. Again, this is stuff I don't have a whole lot to say on it, because what can you say? The stuff with Endeavour is near perfectly executed. He's just totally broken physically and emotionally. He sees himself as being part of the problem, and whilst you can argue that he is, given his treatment of Dabi growing up, at the same time, in the grand scheme of things, all that stuff was just a smaller slice of what is happening in the world right now. He's not the sole person to blame with it, but the stuff with Dabi probably isn't helping matters. But he sees himself right now as being the architect of destruction for everything that's gone on right now. He's ruined not just his name, but the name of heroes across Japan. And I imagine that this whole controversy, everything that's going on in Japan right now, would be filtering out to hero society worldwide. So there'll be a lot of people in America or the UK or Germany or South Africa or wherever, whatever, even if some of these countries still exist, that there's going to be people asking the question, well, what have superheroes ever done for us? And the idea of that is probably killing him deep down, and that's not even getting into the, for want of a better phrase, family drama that he has to deal with right now. The moment towards the end of it where you see him breaking down in the way that he does is just, it's heartbreaking. As I've said in the past, I've never really been much of a fan of him, but it's hard to not feel something when a character that is that outwardly strong and stoic and heroic just shatters in that way. You'd have to be inhuman to not get some kind of feeling out of that, not get some kind of sense of sympathy out of that. I get the feeling that even if he does make it to the end of all of this, to the end of My Hero Academia in one piece, or at least alive, I get this distinct feeling that he probably would end up retiring after everything is said and done, because this isn't something you can just walk back from, and certainly not in the time frame that we're dealing with here. Like, if My Hero Academia had been set over the course of several years, maybe, but it's only the course of only several months, so I think that this effectively what we're going to get into for the remainder of the series is effectively going to be Endeavour's last stand, but that is something that we'll discuss in later point. We didn't really see much of the Todoroki family as a whole, and I feel that we'll see more of them next week, though I did like the moment with Endeavour shouting at them as they're about to walk in, and the look on Endeavour's face where he sees his wife for the first time in years. We'll see exactly where they go with that. I am worried that it's going to just boil down to a thing of her being the catalyst for him getting back into the saddle, which I don't really know how I feel about that, but we'll see how it's executed next week. Now we're going to move into the negatives, so I will be honest, it's really hard to find many negatives with this, so this is only going to be a really short thing, because there's only one thing I have an issue with, and it is just a nitpick, and anything else I would bring up really would just be a nitpick, and it is just the episode's title. It's called The Hellish Todoroki Family Part 2, and they don't really make up a whole lot of the episode. They only really come into this in the final 5 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes of the episode's runtime, and then, even then, they're not really much of a focus. I suppose you can make the argument that Hawks is effectively like the adoptive son of Endeavour, so you can excuse it in that regard, but, you know, in the grand scheme of things, not that much of a problem, because everything else in the episode was that good. Overall, this episode was fantastic, and I feel that it will be one of the standout episodes of this entire season, and one of the standout episodes of the entire series of My Hero Academia. I think that it treats the reality of the drama just brilliantly. The situation as it is just executing in a very mature and thoughtful way. It does everything perfectly. I mean, the only issue, I suppose, is the little flashback thing we just seen Bakugo stomping through the hospital halls. I don't think we needed that, but again, that's just a nitpick and just itself not really important to anything, really. So, with that said, I think there's nothing else for us to do apart from get into Comment Corner! Our first comment comes from Big X1, who says, "Honestly, I'm curious what that video would have been. I enjoyed this week's episode. I wish the prison break stuff had gone on for longer too. It felt too short." Thank you for the comment, and that episode, the video in question that I mentioned in last week's video was... It was a what-if scenario thing where Muscular was Bakugo's uncle. I might revisit the idea in a future point. I'm not sure if what-ifs for My Hero Academia are something that people are interested in, and even then I think they'd want for more headline stuff, like what if Midoriya didn't get a quirk, or he'd been born with a quirk. That kind of stuff I think people would be more interested in than something that's just based on a random joke that I made in some random video about a year or so ago, but hey, that's its whole other thing. And as for that episode itself, yeah, I do wish the prison break stuff had gone on for longer, but for reasons which we'll discuss ever so slightly shortly, I get why it isn't now. Next we have Scott TV Gaming. They leave a couple comments, so I'm going to do them in a double barrel thing. They say, "Funnily enough, this episode was actually probably the best adapted episode of this entire season thus far. The only big difference being that the scene with the Destros clone attacking the Public Safety Commission would have been shown in the episode after the prison break, but this was moved to the last episode instead. Thank you for your comment, and sorry for the awkward edit. I just realised just then that the next 3 minutes of the video just didn't record, so I'm having to re-record it, so apologies if things feel a bit rushed or not quite as enthusiastic as it would be, because I'm a little bit angry right now. But anyway, thank you for your comment, and I am happy that other people have had a similar kind of reaction to you as far as feeling just quite as enthusiastic about the episode as they had done. I am happy to hear that it was as well adapted as it had been, again, even if it wasn't necessarily for me, as I said in the review itself, and by all means go back to that previous video to get my full feelings on it. I just feel that the episode itself was just too dense at times, and the pacing for me was just all over the place. I am happy that so many people got something out of it, so many people did enjoy it, and that for many of the manga readers, it was just so well executed, but, you know, for me it wasn't, and that's just my opinion. These videos are just my opinion. My opinion is no more, no less valid than anyone else's, but still, thank you for your comment. And next up, we have Silver Atlas, and with all due respect, even without the awkward timing stuff, I won't be reading the comment in its entirety, but by all means, go back and read their comment in a previous video. It is a very in-depth, very comprehensive discussion about the Tartarus escape and the plan that the villains had, and explaining in-universe why everything was done as quickly as it had done. I've got the comment on screen so you can read it, so by all means pause it if you need to, go back to the previous video if you want to see it in a better resolution, but I just want to say thank you for your comment, and thank you for just how in-depth, and I can't even think of the word, my brain's a little bit over, but just how comprehensive and just how again, in depth that it is. I feel I understand it now, and my opinion of the whole escape stuff has changed as a result of it. It has educated me into the true realities of why all that happened in the way that it had done. Again, I still feel there was probably a bit too much going on in that first half, and possibly with a little bit of Spielbergian editing, you could have probably gotten away by having the entire episode dedicated to it, but only happening technically over the course of a few seconds. But again, I now get why it happened over the case of only a few seconds, because they had to do it on only a few seconds, otherwise he wouldn't have gotten away with it. Had it been a couple of seconds longer, a pro hero probably would have turned up and put an end to it all. Given everything that's gone on, I think there's a fair few pro heroes who would, they get into a fight with Toma and maybe an accident would happen and, whoopsie daisy, Toma's not around anymore. Oh, these things happen and, well, don't think about all the paperwork I'm going to have to do now. Harumph, that kind of thing. I can see an accident happening if some pro hero with bad mood's going to take him on, but that's a whole other thing. I understand why it happened now. I understand why it had to be something more of a smash and grab, because a second longer and it wouldn't have worked. There's a part of me that still thinks it might have gone a little bit too smoothly for them. Maybe if they didn't have the thing of all the other villains escaping, that might have helped it, but that's a whole other matter. Again, I think that with all this learnt and all this in my mind, it does change my mind and my feelings on stuff a little bit, but, that's just how things are. I do feel that the biggest problem might be just been the fact that I become a victim of self-hype due to knowing about this thing happening months in advance, but not knowing how it was executed in the manga, because it was ruined for me by some cretin putting it in a YouTube comment, or rather a YouTube video description thing. But hey, that's a rant for a whole other time. And I just want to say thank you all for listening to this week's review. By all means, leave a comment down in the comment section down below, and we'll get back to you shortly, and you will be read out in next week's show. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!